This week's gospel, Jesus meets the woman at the well. It's a very famous story, very popular story in Jesus' ministry. It's also a very long narrative, right? So the version of this gospel in this book is just going to be snippets along the way. It's not the full gospel. So I would encourage you to try to read the whole story so you can get the full picture, because it's this long conversation that unfolds between Jesus and this woman. A lot of cool stuff going on in the story. A couple of things for us to point out. This woman is actively living a lifestyle opposed to God's laws. This is why she's out at the well in the middle of the day, because she doesn't want to be around people who are going to remind her of her bad choices and all this sort of stuff, right? The important thing here, though, is Jesus isn't disgusted by her. He's not afraid of her. He doesn't chastise her really at all either, right? He meets her where she is in this point of isolation from other people, in this point of being just kind of disgusted by her own sin but not willing to get out of it yet. And he meets her there, and he has this conversation with her. He just engages her in dialogue. And over the course of this conversation, she gradually comes to recognize who he is, right? At the beginning of it, he's just this guy at the well, right? And then she recognizes, oh, he's a teacher. And then she starts saying, oh, you're a prophet. And then she realizes, this dude's the Messiah, right? And then she runs back to town and she tells everybody, right? And so the takeaway for us is, number one, Jesus is not disgusted by your sin, right? He's not going to shame you for it either. The devil shames us for sin. God forgives us for sin as long as we're sorry for it, right? So we all have these sins that we're kind of embarrassed about. We don't even want to admit them necessarily even to ourselves, right? There's ones that when you go to confession, you're not sure that you want to say, or you avoid confession because you don't want to say it. Shouldn't do that, right? Still go to confession. Jesus is not ashamed of your sin. He's not going to shame you for it, right? He wants to just wash it away if you'll let him. So that's takeaway number one. Takeaway number two, the example of this woman in this prolonged dialogue with Jesus. Call it prayer, right? The longer you sit with the Lord, the longer you talk to him, the more you come to realize who he is, right? For a lot of us, God is a character in a book. We don't necessarily want it to be that way. Some of us do, right? But we might not be able to help it. That's just the way that he is. The way that you help it is you sit with the Lord in prayer. You read the scriptures, you hear Jesus talk, you sit and you meditate on it, you sit in silence and you try to let God respond. And then we too can go through that same progression where he's a character in a book to, oh, he's actually a real person, to, oh, he actually is God, right? He does things in my life and I can hear him speak to me. So we can follow that same progression as this woman at the well. The final takeaway, the very end of this story, she actually goes and tells people. That might be the hardest thing for some of us. We don't want to be that street preacher where we go out to our neighbors and we're constantly talking about Jesus and inviting them to church and all that kind of stuff. And maybe that isn't what we're called to do necessarily. But there is some level we are supposed to go out and tell people about Jesus. Yes, through our actions, but also through our words. And so we have to figure out, what does that look like in school? How can I talk to my friends about Jesus without being this overbearing person? How do I talk about Jesus at work without being this person who's imposing my views on people or coming across as judgmental or whatever, right? When I've had that deep encounter with Jesus, when I've gone through that progression that this woman at the well went through, it's a whole lot easier for me to speak to, no, God's a real person. He's interested in my life and he's interested in yours as well. And then leave that decision up to you. That journey that this woman takes with Jesus at the well is the journey that hopefully we're taking this Lent to recognize on a deeper level who Jesus is and how much he cares for us, despite all of our sin.